CMV, no graphic sex scene has ever contributed to a movie's storyline. Would Team America count? I would argue that when it comes to comedy films that the comedy actually adds to the storyline, and that is one of the funniest scenes in the film. Deleted. Is this argument specific to sex, or could films in general be insinuated to save time? The Last Duel has a long graphic and uncomfortable sex scene which is the entire point of the movie. Not sure how you could remove it or make it just 3 seconds. Oldboy, 2003. Do not watch 2013, it's complete garbage. The only good thing is naked Elizabeth Olsen. The graphic sex scenes are very important to the plot and the movie wouldn't work without them. You could watch Irreversible, a movie about a horrible sex scene that plays backwards. The movie is using the terribly graphic nature of the sexual assault to set up almost the entire rest of the story. It wouldn't be the same movie without the scene, as terrifying as it is. Greater than no graphic sex scene has ever contributed to a movie's storyline. Have you seen Gone Girl? The sex scene in that movie actually does contribute to the storyline. How do you feel about any other non-dialogue scenes in movies? Fight scenes? Chase scenes? Morning montages? Long shots of objects? Environments? Couldn't we just cut the fight scene and show the bad guys on the ground? Or cut the chase to heroes saying, phew, it was close. Greater than graphic sex scenes are unnecessary. The accused has a graphic sex scene that is the instigating incident for the whole movie. 50 Shades of Grey, boom roasted. Movie was cringe, 10, but without those scenes it would have been you. Season 1 * at best. When a movie's storyline is about having sex with a plumber, a graphic sex scene is the plot payoff we deserve. Movies aren't about what's necessary, they're entertainment. Good photography isn't necessary for the storyline. Most jokes in movies aren't necessary for the storyline, yet we still like them. Some people like the sex scenes in movies, thus the scenes make their enjoyment better, making them a good component of a piece of entertainment. Bridgerton, the pull-out method, and one character's misunderstanding of what was going on was key to the story. It just wouldn't have made sense if it was described in dialogue versus shown in sex scenes. Now whether they're graphic, IDK. I guess it depends on the viewer. Greater than thanks for all the non-judgmental comments. A lot of good points were made. Maybe changed my mind? I'd say I am at least neutral now, yet no deltas awarded? Get to it, man. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo had one of the most graphic sex scenes, off the top of my head, that really propelled the storyline. When she got revenge on her caseworker and brutalized him with a dildo up the ass along with the tattoo showed she can take care of herself. The French movie Irreversible is almost completely centered around a graphic sex scene. The graphic nature of the scene is meant to draw out intense emotions. The movie is not for the faint of heart. I would say in 95% of cases they're just boring and I'm just skipping through them. I literally can't with Outlander. It's like they're F***ing in every episode. There's this 5% though made right, even if they last a minute or more, that make me want to watch, because they feel either exciting or pleasantly romantic. The end of Requiem for a Dream. It's tough to watch and it helps to show the true horrors of addiction. How many films have you watched with graphic sex scenes? Did you see Blue is the Warmest Color? Epic Anal Gangbangs 3 would not have been a success without those scenes. Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese in The Terminator having sex is literally an essential plot point for the entire series. Atonement is one film I can think of off of the top of my head where the sex scene was crucial to the plot. ITT, dozens of good responses and counterexamples and no engagement from Up. Don John, I Spit on Your Grave, 50 Shades of Grey, mini scenes in Game of Thrones or Spartacus. But what is your point? For that matter, a good percentage of a movie is not about story progression. Why isolate sex scenes? Just saw The Devil's Advocate, sex scene was definitely important to the story. Helped drive the point that he was losing his mind. Newsflash, the studios and producers who finance and make movies don't give a shit about the story. They care about how much money the movie is going to make. Don't ever forget, sex sells. I think generic yet graphic sex is unnecessary, but graphic sex that reveals something about the characters while occurring is necessary. I think there's a graphic one out there that really showed the depravity of being trapped in addiction. It gives much more of a I want to puke vibe than anything. Going above and beyond can add to a storyline, but in general I do partially agree in that most graphic sex scenes don't add anything to the storyline, and serve as emotional or monetary goals. Berserk. I'm on board with your original post, it is unnecessary to me. In fact, it takes me out of the scene and I see them as real people pretending. It kills the mood. If I wanted to watch porn, I'd choose a different movie altogether. I prefer the subtly and less fake simulation. Cheers to everyone who does. Closing parenthesis single quote closing square bracket. The one exception is Team America, of course. The movies where there are graphic sex scenes aren't being watched for their storylines. The Last House on the Left, I mean the entire plot is built of the revenge for the rape. Very, very simple. Sex sells. Why do you think it's nothing but hot bitches on TV trying to sell us shit? It's not a matter of changing your mind. I don't believe that will happen. It's a matter of dollar. If you can find a way to change human nature, you might be able to affect this. As long as images, sounds, videos, writing, make peckers and guineas tingle, people will pay money for it. Irreversible. The entirety of Bridgerton, sex scenes lasted minutes instead of 5 to 10 seconds it should have lasted. Every Netflix show or movie seems to have at least 3 sex scenes. It just ruins the mood and makes it uncomfortable for everyone watching, especially if you're watching with family, parents. It's just gross. The Accused comes to mind. You might say it's not a sex scene because it is a rape, but it is graphic and it is essential to the plot that it is there, and to a large degree that it is graphic. Holy shit, the show Outlander is one of the worst when it comes to flagrant overuse of sex scenes. It's just to make their length requirements for each episode without having to write dialogue. Zack and Mary Make a Porno is a good example. But that one is kinda stacked in my favor. I do agree that forcing a romantic scene in a movie is needed. I'm thinking like action movies where they jam it in where it doesn't belong, like a random sex scene after being chased for your life by X. I work at a group home and a lot of the older boys like watching horror movies, understandably, but it's so goddamn difficult to find good horror movies that don't contain any sex scenes. IDK, 50 Shades of Grey was nothing but graphic sex scenes. Movie didn't really have a storyline and wasn't really a movie, more of soft porn, so your point still stands. I would say it was essential in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Lisbeth's abuse was a vital part of making her motivation throughout the rest of the movie seem realistic. But was it enjoyable to watch? Hell no. I think you should define graphic more clearly. When I first read this, I assumed like rape, assault, which can really be relevant to a story. Think First They Killed My Father. This really illustrated the chaos and brutality of the Khmer Rouge. Sounds like you, re-suggesting movies need overly porny sex scenes. I do agree with you, they aren't strictly necessary with small exception of movies that symbolize something with the scene which would add to the plot. Black Swan would be an example of this. Not a movie, but the sex scene in Arcane was juxtaposed with another scene that moved plot and character development forward simultaneously in a clever way. Being vague to avoid spoilers. I agree. We wouldn't watch them go to the toilet, or we wouldn't see anything graphic. Same applies here. They are to sell tickets. Hell, people would watch an entire bad movie because of titty flash. There was a lot of graphic sex in Nymphomania. It was actually pretty crucial to the story. It does sometimes contribute greatly to the plot, but, yes, a lot of movies do have excessive sex that can degrade the quality of the film. HBO is notorious for unnecessary sex scenes for the sake of nudity and sexiness. I sometimes see when the scene is necessary and warranted, but often, I think you're definitely right. The insinuation that sex will occur is enough to contribute to the plot. I don't think it's supposed to contribute to the storyline. I think it's supposed to contribute to more people spending money on watching it. Sex sells. I thought everyone knew that by now. And #200B. But I do think 50 Shades of Grey sex scenes contributed to the storyline. Irreversible. The rape depiction was horrific and because of it, forces the viewer to be immersed in the movie. Without it, it is harder to empathize with a woman, and the two men looking for revenge. The longer it goes, the worse it gets. It makes you feel awful. Porn films or movies. Do you not think the graphic sex scenes in a porn movie contribute to the storyline? Maybe, storyline, is a stretch, but the sex scene in the room is completely necessary. How about the sex scene at the end of The 40-Year-Old Virgin? Wrong, the plotline of Backdoor Sluts 9 is heavily reliant on nudity. Deadpool getting pegged on the International Women's Day served the plot, and all the sex they had. Porn exists. The whole point of a porn movie is to set up the sex scene. Outside of that, there's always the tattoo, scar trope, where someone's hiding a tattoo or scar, has sex, their partner sees it, and the plot goes from there. Caligula isn't Caligula without the graphic sex scenes. Berserk when the main character's best friend, rival becomes a demon and rapes the main character's love interest, breaking her mind after they went through hell to save him. Megan is Missing shows toward the end, a victim of kidnapping getting raped on film. While not showing the actual act of the intercourse, it is greatly implied what is happening to the victim. This on its own really helps hammer home what really happens to victims of such crimes other than, oh, they were murdered. It's not about the storyline, it's about sex being sexy and entertaining and potentially even artful. Would I be changing your mind if I convinced you that there was more to a movie than storyline? In Caligula, the graphic sex is there to show explicitly the depravity and hedonism of the Romans, and Caligula in particular. Having 3 seconds of kissing would not have had the same impact. Trying to remember the name of it, but there's a movie about a high school overcoming the emotional and psychological damage from being raped. They could have insinuated it, but that leaves it up to the viewer's interpretation. Showing it without it being porn makes it very clear what happened and why she's dealing with these problems. Movies are unnecessary. Should we stop making them? The Girl with Blue Hair, or however it is called. Lots of sex scenes and they're pretty relevant to the story. I mean, it wasn't a sex scene, but that chick in Total Recall with 3 titties, that contributed greatly to the success of that movie, mostly being sarcastic. Antichrist, 2009. The same thing could be said for cool explosions, epic CGI, unique shot transitions, X'd. Sometimes they contribute to the plot or set a mood, but some things as movies are just supposed to be crowd pleasers. Personally, I don't think everything in a movie needs to contribute to the movie's storyline, provided it's not detracting from the overall experience. Love this new edit of Eyes Wide Shut where Tom Cruise discovers that all these rich weirdos have a secret party where they get together to hold hands. MacGruber. Bridgerton. Because you had to watch how he stopped short of getting her pregnant and she had no idea what was going on. It's a major plotline. Every scene Law and Order? Short Bus, a movie that relies on graphic scenes to tell a story. If you cut every movie down to only scenes that advance the storyline, then you could make every movie like 45 minutes. Nymphomaniac Volume 1 and 2? Sex is a form of communication. It can show you character and relationships just as well as dialogue. Graphic sex is the purest form of that communication. Of course it's often just titillation, but used by a good director, it's storytelling and incredibly powerful. Greater than I understand insinuating the sex. But what's the point of making it last longer than 3 seconds? There was a scene in Election, I think. It symbolized how their marriage was garbage because he kept fantasizing about someone else. American Beauty, I think too. really showed how creepy he was and how uncomfortable his daughter's friend was. As a plot device, sex is used as a payoff between two lovers, or a twist between two unexpectedly attracted characters to thicken the story, two developments that can come elsewhere or be accomplished by other types of story elements. Rape scenes infuse tension, suspense, and horror in some cases. Any other type of sex scenes are gratuitous and grind the story to a halt. I agree with Op on this. Someone never saw Strange Days. 2 words, Cronin. Berg. What about a movie about a killer but no one, not even the audience, knows who it is, and throughout the movie it drops small subtle hints like they like to choke their partner during a long graphic sex scene? May I interest you in a Serbian film? Boobs are cool. No scene without dialogue really has. There are films have talking during sex scenes, and then the dialogue has contributed. It's almost purely dialogue that contributes to storylines. The rest is simply eye candy. I feel like the sex scene in Gone Girl did a great job of conveying how utterly sociopathic Amy Dunn was. See, Irreversible. Terminator. I disagree. Eyes Wide Shut. It's deep. Stories are not only told through words and a character's actions, but also through the way a character goes through an action, as well as through symbolic and literal images. If they didn't show it in Debbie Does Dallas, then that movie would not have been as successful as it was. The same can be said about all feature-length pornographic movies. Without sex scenes, then you would have less connection to what the character is going through. Man who's never seen Oldboy detected. Rosemary's Baby had a rape scene and it was a catalyst to the plot. Interestingly, Zack and Miri make a porno does kinda make sense. The scene the two have sex, it's clear it isn't just fun work like everyone else, it's a scene where you can see that they have feelings for one another. So in comparison to the scenes, we see how the relationships differ. Terminator? Oldboy essentially requires that scene for the ending to be as effective as it is. Have you ever seen American Psycho? I'd say the graphic scenes were completely relevant to the film. 50 Shades of Grey would have been a short, confusing movie. Thanks to the sex scenes, it was a long, bad movie. The Nightingale. Every detail of the rape scene is necessary for you to understand not only the movie in general, but lots of the smaller details and the behavior of the main character. Great movie, in my opinion. God forbid movies, which portray realistic humans in realistic human settings, performing realistic human acts and showing realistic human emotions and desires show. Gasp. Human intimacy. The nerve. I'd say the rape scene in Outlander was necessary. Highly uncomfortable, but I think that was the point. It certainly did something for the series. Terminator. The sex scene in The Terminator is pretty critical to the plot. It led to a whole other movie. No scene has ever contributed to a movie storyline. The real way to properly consume a story is by reading the book, which communicates exactly everything needed for the audience to experience the events and emotions involved, in a much more direct manner. Removed. The scene in which Hannah is raped in the hot tub in Asterisk 13 Reasons Why is pivotal to the story, as that was one of the reasons she killed herself. History of Violence has 2 graphic sex scenes that contrast each other to show how the character has changed. Implied sex would not have been effective at displaying this. Contribution to storyline is incidental, not an end in itself. If all you care about is plot, go read a summary on Wikipedia. Team America World Police, Thread. The film Irreversible would not be the same without its very graphic sex scene. It's the central part of the film's theme. I would say a number of the graphic sex scenes in a Serbian film benefit the movie and its dramatic themes. Wrong. See Nymphomaniac Volume 1. And 2. The incredibly graphic sex scenes are pretty much what the movie is about. There's no movie without them. You need to watch History of Violence. 2 of the best sex scenes in any movie. Vital to the story. Irreversible 2002 kinda relies on graphic sex for plot. Don't watch it. Movies don't exist to just tell a narrative. Also, people have sex, have always had sex, and will always have sex. Sex is much more commonplace than graphic violence, yet we, Americans, I'm assuming, have much less of a problem depicting violence. Boogie Nights, Nymphomaniac, American Psycho, probably a few others where it is completely necessary. I recently watched The Terminator and at the end of the show the 2 main characters have sex. This is the setup for John Connor to be born and save the world. Plus you come to realize John Connor knowingly sent his father to die in the past so that he could be born. This plot enhances the movie as you understand the sacrifice that were made. In Alien Private Eye Asterisk, Remlo's signature fedora gets knocked off during sex and reveals his true cosmic nature through his pointy ears. To clarify, the hat was the sole article of clothing he was still wearing at that point. 'Cause some people horny. Graphic sex scenes serve higher purposes than just storyline. They can engage the viewer's emotions and help motivate the audience to the headspace a director desires. Shawshank Redemption. Not comfortable or glorious, but important for the plot. Remove the sex scene from Top Gun and you have less of a reason to experience catharsis relating to the sexual tension in the plot. I would say the sex scene in Cape Fear definitely advanced the plot, and made me fear De Niro's character more. I would say the sex scene in Cape Fear advanced the plot, and made me fear De Niro's character even more. Do you feel like a movie might feel more or less realistic if it chooses to censor certain parts? If you always censor graphic sex, you always remove a certain degree of the suspension of disbelief. Irreversible would like to talk to you, although it was technically a rape scene. Edit. Since it looks like someone already mentioned Irreversible down below, I'll change it to something lighter. Lethal Weapon 5. Scum. The showgirl's sex scene is peak camp and completely adds to the cheesiness of the story. To lose it would be a complete disservice to the genre. Your mistake is thinking that only the plot matters. Americans are so repressed. It's part of the art. I would argue in that case all graphic violence and action scenes are unnecessary to understand the plot. Take Moon Knight for example. the aftermath of the destruction is enough to let me understand what happened. I don't need 360 videos of Neo from the Matrix doing some kick-ass action to know he defeats the bad guys. Sex education got a whole lot harder. Rob Roy has an anal rape scene that is necessary to villainize Tim Roth's character in a personal way. Necessary is a continuum for artistic, emotional effect. Where that line is not objective, but certainly you can recognize that there's a threshold to rely basic facts that something occurred, and that's a different threshold for an emotional connection. I don't know if it's been mentioned yet, but a dangerous method would seem an obvious counterexample. Even Keira Knightley, who has rightfully been quite vocal about sex scenes, thought they were necessary for the film. There's a movie named Nymphomaniac Parts 1 and 2. Trust me, nowhere to go with the story without the sex scenes. The Millennium films, the original, have very graphic scenes that are so hard to watch but are also very necessary. In general, though, I think you are right. Less than irreversible has entered the chat. Greater than. Poor Monica Bellucci. 3 titties always makes me total recall. I'd be interested to see Ass Bandit 5 without the sex scenes. What about in Mulholland Drive? Spoilers for the film, the sex scenes are an integral part of Diane's fantasy, including the graphic nature of the scene. The camera explores Rita's body for an important reason. The Nightingale. The idea that graphic sex scenes don't add to the plot, and that they are unnecessary, are two different things. Most sex you could take out of movies. But the thing is, people want and like the sex. It makes us feel good. The whole movie is usually like this. Why do you think actors are so hot? The sex appeal. I don't know, the one in Matrix Reloaded clearly did a lot for the amazing plot. The one in 300 was cash though. Unless it's for shock value. Not a movie but Boardwalk Empire. Towards the end of season 2, there were flashback scenes from when Jimmy Dormady was a student at Princeton. I'll leave it at that. Lots of movies have things that are unnecessary and I'm glad they're in them. Jokes, for example, may not contribute to an overall story, but I'm glad they're in there. Films are art, not essays. Scenes add flavor and do not have to follow a strict rigid formula for driving a plot. A plot is not the be-all end-all of a film. The scene in Parasite. Parasite's sex scene is a huge contributor to the detachment and in some cases, fetishization of lower class by upper class, directly contributing, perhaps even being the leading factor for the final events of the movie. Eyes Wide Shut? The same could be said about every scene. Any movie, or book for that matter, can just be a bullet list of plot points. It'd be terrible to experience. I believe Les Miserables is one of the few exceptions to your point. It shows the broken mother who will do anything in order to provide for her daughter. I agreed with you 100% until I watched Team America, World Police. I've already seen someone mention it, but it deserves second mention. Someone has never watched Backdoor Sluts 9. The sex scene in America World Police didn't technically advance the story, but it was goddamn hilarious. You should watch Once Upon a Time in America, if you really want to see a sex scene contributing to the movie. I mean, the scene itself is disturbing and hard to watch, but it definitely adds to the story. Almost all the graphic sex scenes in Californication contributed to the storyline. Motherfucker. For me as a male, I like wherever there are BOOBs. What about American Psycho? Lust, Caution and Shame are two films that instantly spring to mind that have graphic sex scenes that are incredibly important on both a character level and for the storyline. I mean, sex is just another one of those everyday things. It can be as important as anything else in a film story, and some filmmakers decide to show it more graphically than others. How to say, I don't understand film, without saying I don't understand film lol. The scene in Black Swan with Mila Kunis and Natalie Portman actually does a lot for the plot. The sex scene in MacGruber is the funniest part of the entire movie, hands down. Greater than, but I still stand by graphic sex scenes being unnecessary. Lolo, necessary to who? Sex sells. It's proven. Time and time again. It's added for studios to make enough money to pay everyone and supply production value and turn a profit. It adds to it for enough people that your point isn't even an opinion. It's just straight up false. Documented and quantifiable. Now where is my delta? My species has entered the chat. What would be the point of American Pie if he didn't flock the pie? In Ozark, Marty is watching a video of his wife getting flocked from behind by another man. The other man smacks her ass and she enjoys it. Later on, when Marty is flocking his wife from behind, he smacks her ass and she gives an odd look, then starts to cry. Signaling that Marty knows about the affair. No paint job ever made a car go faster either. I have one counterpoint. In the sequel to the 300, there is an erotic sex scene that is simultaneously major character development and moves the plot. I say this off in a few seconds, some kissing, maybe a bareback, falling on the bed, fade to black. Most of the time, sometimes something will happen that is relevant to the plot. Then they can't fade to black. Irreversible? Have you ever seen the Korean film Oldboy? Its graphic sex scene has a purpose. I recommend watching the movie, it's fantastic. If you don't plan on it, I can tell you the details and why the scene actually plays a purpose. I absolutely need to see Eva Menedes's boobs.